Hey Sam, for number one, you can see that this email follows the direct structure. So I immediately stated the main idea along with the purpose of this email in the opening paragraph. This is followed by the short background paragraph and some detailed paragraphs going into depth about my answers for the quiz. And finally, SMART goals here, as well as a next step paragraph. For number two, I showed complete list to make sure by making sure I addressed all 5 areas as I shown before, as well as the 3 SMART goals. This includes the prompting questions you asked for each section. So I answered why this is of value to me, for example, there. And I also provided some context. So within one of the paragraphs here, I gave a short context just showing you who I was in the past so that it makes more sense to why I gave myself this score, for example. For number 3, I made sure the message was reader focused by trying to direct the message more towards you. So I have mentioned of the purpose of this email is to give you an idea. I know that you want to learn about your students, give you a better understanding of me as a student. There's also at the in the middle somewhere here, I have a mention of you. I just kind of compared my previous experience versus now. And another thing I'd like to mention is that I decided not to list out the 5 areas in the opening paragraph because you made the quiz yourself, so you know what the 5 areas that you wanted us to respond. So it would have been redundant. I think the headings are enough for you to get an idea of what I answered in this email. For number 4, clarity, I demonstrated using firstly a direct structure, and there's a few instances I use acronyms, but for the ones I did, I made sure to define it at first mention. So I use HTML and CSS here, but I made sure to define them and spell it out first. There is also the SMART goals and the BCIT acronyms, but I decided not to define them because I know for a fact that you know what they are. And for this entire piece, I used a Hemingway to get rid of any passive voice, so there shouldn't be any passive voice in this email. And lastly, I made sure that I was grade 8 on Hemingway for readability, as you mentioned in the style guide, to keep it at a grade 8 level. For number 5, I made sure the writing is concise by removing any it is or there are sentences. Originally, I had transition sentences at the beginning. So for example, for this paragraph here, my first sentence was, in contrast to attendance and punctuality, I gave myself 3 out of 5 for preparation for class to kind of transition between these 2 paragraphs, but I decided not to use it because I wanted to keep a parallel structure for all these paragraphs, and I think the heading is enough of a transition, so it would have been redundant. And for number 6, coherence, my writing shows coherence since I followed the same order as a quiz, so it makes logical sense for you. So that's more for coherence between paragraphs. As for within the paragraph, I made sure to use lots of transition words like furthermore, for example, to address this. So this refers to something in the previous sentence, although, however. And lastly, I used in conclusion to kind of signpost to you that I'm wrapping this paragraph or this section up. For number 7, I made sure this email is courteous. I had made sure to maintain a polite tone and have a section at the very bottom for goodwill, so thank you for taking the time to read this. I made sure to be honest with my answers and made this email as reader-friendly as possible by using headings and white space and lists to make it easier to read. For number 8, I made sure the information is correct by constantly referring back to the assignment sheet to double-check what your questions were, and that I made sure that my answers were actually directed and actually answered the questions. And also for the SMART goals, I made sure that they were indeed SMART goals, so they were specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, as you can see, for instance, on this first goal. And for language correctness, I used Hemingway and Grammarly to double-check my writing. For number 9, I demonstrated concreteness by rewording any passive sentences I had. So originally I had since I know you're interested in your students, but I made it now to since I know you want to learn about your students, so more active voice. For example, I made a point more concrete by giving you more details. So rather than just saying I have good attendance, I made sure I mentioned here throughout my 4 years in university, I can count on one hand the number of times I missed a lecture, so very few. So I really tried to hit home what I was trying to say. As for the subject line, this is my subject line right here. I made sure to include the class code, what program I am, what set I am, and finally just a short description of what this email is about. For number 11, I decided to heading and list because I wanted to make it easier for you to read. Here I use headings for all of the 5 aspects as well as the SMART goals to really signpost what I'm going to talk about later. And this is my labeled lists because at first I had subheadings for each goal, but because they have similar formatting, I decided to use a labeled list to make it more concise and more readable. Originally, I actually changed the wording of this heading slightly. Originally in the quiz, it was using available resources, but since the other headings are noun phrases, I want it to be parallel, so I changed using to usage of available resources. Number 12, I didn't use any italics for emphasis, but I did use bold for the headings and also for the labeled list because it was part of the format for label lists. And I double checked with you that it was okay to bold the headings. And finally, I used white space to signal changing sections and paragraphs just to make it more readable. I tried not to have 2 big paragraphs just so it's more easy to read through. Okay, and for number 13, to make it logical and coherent, I made sure to consult your style guide and added transition sentences to make it flow. So for example, here I used however for context, notably. So originally my sentence was, I can be late sometimes due to unforeseen circumstances. That's one sentence. And then my next sentence was, I address this by adjusting my commute time. So it kind of flows because I did make a referral to the previous sentence by using this, but it flows better and has better coherence when I add it although. So now this is as one sentence with a complete thought. So I say my commitment to attendance persists today as I've yet to miss any class. Furthermore, I aim to arrive at least 10 minutes earlier before class start. So this is like a build upon on not only am I committed to attendance, but also to punctuality. Kind of builds on the idea. For number 14, I made sure to eliminate most errors by reading it out loud. So I read this email from the bottom up. So as you mentioned, when we're trying to proofread, we shouldn't be trying to write anymore, we should be correcting errors. So I really tried to focus on that by doing the bottom-up approach. As I said, I've used Hemingway and Grammarly to address any errors, and the punctuation guide that you provided for us. One part I was unsure of was whether to use a colon or comma. So the punctuation guide said I could use a colon, but that I believe is more for formal emails. So I decided to stick with a comma here. Finally, for number 15, this email achieves its purpose because it answers all the questions of the assignment, and I made sure to double check the assignment sheet many times and refer to it throughout the entire writing process. And the email should have all fulfilled the C's, the 7 C's, and by the end of this, it should achieve the goal of giving you an idea of how I think of myself and what my goals are, and you should know me better as a student.